Okay, Boker Tov. Today's stuff is Mem Aleph 41. We pick up on Mem Amud Bet near at the bottom, and it says 4 lines from the bottom. So the Mishnah had been talking about, the classic case of nezek done by an ox, but we had appended the and moved into questions about apotropos and when it loses its identity as muad, becoming a muad under an apotropos. But the last Mishnah, really, the editors of the Gemara not the editors, the publishers of the Vilna Shas, whatever, appended to the end of the last Mishnah, what should have been a new Mishnah, which is focusing on kofar, and that's really where we've transitioned to. So the end of the last Mishnah spoke about a stadium ox and provoking it to gore, and that you don't go ahead and you don't stone the ox. So the first question, because it has to be goring on its own. So the first question that the Gemara had was whether you could use the ox on the altar, whether the fact that it didn't have Veira makes it like a nirva, it doesn't matter that it was forced upon it, or whether nevertheless the fact that you don't stone it means that it does not have this stigma associated to it, and it does not become necessarily invalid for the altar. It would be in a case where you wouldn't actually stone it, like there would not be sufficient evidence, it would be the testimony of the owners and so on, but nevertheless the fact that it would have been deserving of stoning had you had sufficient evidence, it would have been deserving of stoning, but the fact that it did gore, right, is that going to be, even if it was provoked, is that sufficient to create this stigma of nevda ba'avera, to invalidate it for the altar? So the Gemara did not resolve that. Now we turn back to the issue actually about the stoning and the kofar and a more sort of central discussion. Let's take a look. Amamar, Nogeach, 4 lines from the bottom, on Mem Amud Bet. Nogeach mashal misakofar. Nogeach ain't a mashal misakofar. So in that discussion of what animals are puzzled for the mizbeach, one is an animal that gored and the other is an animal that did a act of bestiality. Both of those, if there were sufficient witnesses, would be stoned. But even if there's not sufficient testimony, they're puzzled for the altar, okay? And it made a contrast between how weighty they are, because an ogeach will pay kofar, one who gores pays kofar, and an animal who does bestiality does not pay kofar. So that's what Gemara is going to say. So, what's the case? The Rav of the Katla, if it basically in the act of sex, of bestiality, in this act actually killed, let's say it would be a case of the woman that it was penetrating. So Mali Katla Bakarna, Mali Katla Biravia. What difference does it make? It should be paying kofar. What do I care if it killed it with its horns or it killed it through an act of sex? It's an act of killing another person, and therefore there should be kofar. Why not? The Ella to Rav of the Lo Katla. It had this act of sex without killing the woman. So I do a Masham Kovim, you should do a Katlu. So that's not a weakness in the status of it being a Roveya. That's because it didn't actually murder somebody. Now, if you ask me, that's a Pshat of the Breita. Pshat of the Breita is that in one case, a Roveya didn't just do an Aveira, doesn't just get stoned, it took a life. And so that makes it more weighty than the case of Revia, where it did an Aveira, but it didn't take a life. In one case you're paying kofar because a life was taken. So that to me seems to exactly be the point. But the Gemara is saying it's not a legal difference between them. There's no kofar, not because it's weaker, but because it didn't take a life. Okay, so the Gemara said, fine. It had sex and it didn't kill the woman. Okay, so then of course you're not going to pay a kofar. No, but but because of the act of bestiality, it was stoned and basted. So therefore, Ma'u Detema Kimat the Katladami. So I'm sorry, not it. She was stoned because she participated in an act of an act of bestiality. She was stoned. So therefore, the act of Revia does take a life. It takes a life by making the participant in it do a transgression that's deserving of the death penalty. So maybe, therefore, there should be a kofar, even though a human life was lost as a result of this act. That we don't say that, okay, which is a fascinating way of looking at it, but it says, yes, there is a life taken, and even though a life is taken, there's no kofar. Now, Tosfos, of course, asks the question that in this case, presumably, if the woman is getting stoned, that means that the woman, or the woman's getting executed. I think it's executed. That means that the woman was a willing and active participant in the act, right? And if that's true, then the ox didn't gore her. The ox didn't bring about her death. She brought about her own death, right? She was a willing participant in it. So how do you sort of say, what was your halamina there to stone the ox? Because the ox did it to her. In the scenario you described, she was an active and willing participant. So Tosfos tries to create a scenario where like the ox initiated it and then she just followed through, and you could still sort of say that maybe it was the ox's fault. Okay, but anyway, the question is, I think, better than the answer. Okay, but that's a biased position. 1 minute. Rav Amar La'olam de Rav V'Katla. No. It actually, in this act of sex, it actually was so violent, and we are talking about a big bull, okay, that it killed a woman. Okay, so then why not pay kofar? What do I care if it killed it with its horns or it killed it with an act of sex? No, it does make a difference. Karen kavanos lahazik. Hi, kavanos lahanas atzmo. Here is a great question. Is there the halacha of kofar by Shane and Regel that kills someone? Okay, or is it only by kavanas lahazik? So this is an act of Shane that kills somebody. Okay, so is that going to pay kofar? Karen kavanas lahazik, hi kavanas lahanas atzmo. What would be the debate? So, or a parallel debate would be the Regel shadarsa gabitina b'chater aniza. So let's say through Regel, an animal walked and stepped on a tiny baby, on an infant. Okay, notice it says b'chater aniza, because since we're dealing with Shane and Regel, the presumption is that it would follow the parameters of paying for damages, and there wouldn't be a liability in Rishut Harabim. Okay, now. Of course, one wonders about that. Like if an animal just, I don't know, attacked somebody to do this act of sex. I don't know if that ever happens, that an animal, would force itself on a human. But even if that were in a Rishus Harabim, it's not like, animals have, it's called a Mishana, right? I mean, it's not like people can protect themselves against that. Or the whole logic of Rishus Harabim is you should be protecting yourself against these types of things that happen in Rishus Harabim. The owner has a right to have the animal do natural things in Rishus Harabim. So that might be true about leaving your tiny infant baby right in the middle of the street. Like you don't leave your infant baby in the middle of the street. Cars are going to run over it. Okay, so but on the other hand, like an animal attacking somebody and this act of sex, whether that would also be limited to Rishus Hanizak is an interesting question. But the Gemara assumes that fundamentally it follows the same parameters. So would you have regel of kofar if a person was killed, a baby was killed in Rishus Hanizak? Okay, Labai Mashal and kofar, L'Rava lo Mashal and kofar. For Abai, yes, and for Rava, no. It's a very great question, and surprisingly, it doesn't come up in the context of a Mishnah or of a Breita. It really just comes up in interpreting this Mishnah that's discussing about the difference between kofar, about killing and nogeach and roveah for the mizbeach. Okay, Tiny Kabasi Rav, we talk like Rav. Sure, if the din misa, the kosher legabi mizbeach not only is a stadium ox not chayv misa, it can even be used for the altar because it is forced. It did not choose to do it. So, regardless of the case of the altar, we do have a great question of whether there is kofar by Shane and Regel. By Shane and Regel, yes, though.
Don't you find it at all problematic that the language we have to use to discuss these cases almost sounds as if the animal itself is like a bardat?
What?
It's almost as if we're treating the animal.
Well, yes, when it does come to stoning the animal, then what do you call it? Then it is like Kinesis Abal and Kakinesis Ashur. And we're going to see about that. Actually, some of that is going to come up in a minute. Like, let's say an animal tried to gore, an animal and it wound up killing a person. You wouldn't make it a shor in his because like it's caving, to kill one person and kill another person. So yes, there is going to be a lot of that parallel. Michael.
So I'm just trying to understand. So you pay kofar, at least according to the psukim, only if it was a muad, right? Here it seems that you're paying kofar regardless, right? Because it's first, if a shor kills somebody, then you kill the shor. But then shor nagafu
Well, so in the case of Shane and Regel, that's a good question. According to the position that you pay kofar by Shane and Regel, would you pay it immediately? The same way you pay nezek shalom, because it's already considered to be a muad. I don't know, is an animal a muad to step on little babies or whatever, to have sex with a person and kill them in the process of having sex? So I don't know. but it's an interesting question. In the Havamina here, that it would pay because when it was, but if this was being categorized as a Karen, this act that maybe the woman was now going to be executed and based in and so on, if that was sort of seen in the Karen lens, then we would have to be talking about a scenario that it did it 3 times, which you're right, is obviously bizarre. Okay, the other interesting question to ask, and I want to sort of start framing this question for you, which the Gemara is not addressed directly, is the relationship between kofar and stoning the ox. Because, for example, you don't pay in the case of the stadium ox. Would you pay kofar? Okay, I mean, I don't pay. You don't stone the ox in the case of the stadium ox. Would you pay kofar, right? And you can certainly imagine that there could be more liability. Like there's 2 scenarios. One is that I sick my own ox, provoke my own ox to gore somebody. You should say I should certainly pay kofar. The other is that Ruvain provoked my ox to gore Shimon, right? Then I'm much more of an honest. Okay, but the ox you don't stone. What did it say about kofar? How about this case about Shane and Regel, right? Would the case of Shane and Regel? Would you say that what the case? The Gemara say you don't pay kofar, right? Would you stone? That's the reverse. In the case of a Shane and Regel, according to the way Abai reads it, one minute. Right, so Rava says you don't pay kofar by a case of Shane and Regel, right? So the animal sort of either this act of sex or walked on this baby or whatever. Rava says you don't pay kofar. So this animal killed somebody. You're not going to pay kofar. Would you stone the animal? Would you stone the animal or not stone the animal? Right. So that you could always ask whenever you're discussing one of those 2. The important question to ask is what's the story with the other half of it. So you don't stone the animal that was provoked, okay? But will the owners pay kofar? You don't pay kofar, according to Rava, in a case of Shane and Regel. Would you stone the animal? There, it's more obvious, I think, in that case that you wouldn't stone, because what Rava is saying is that Shane and Regel are fundamentally a different category. And you could certainly even say, by logic, you could even say all the more so, right? If an animal did it without intention, if it wasn't kavanas lahazik, it's less of an act of murder on the animal's part, and therefore less of a reason to stone it. You might still want to pay kofar because a life was taken, but it would seem in that case there's less of a reason to stone it. Okay, but that I think is always the question to be asking when you say something about one. What is the story about the other half?
I just find it so interesting that we do not treat the animal. Let's say a dog I'll stick a dog on someone. The dog will kill the person.
Right.
My animal. We don't treat that like a gun in my hand.
Right.
In other words, it's so interesting.
Right. You remember
it's
when
much
the Gemara had the whole
extension
case.
Of the process.
Right. I mean, the Gemara had the case, if you remember, about the snake, and only if you assume that the poison was in the fangs of the snake, the person directly put it on the person. But if the poison had actually come out, even though the person was completely physically manipulating it, it was considered to be it wasn't considered to be an act of direct murder.
Yeah, and even this, so that's the same as a bullet coming out of the gun.
Right. You would think, okay, but nevertheless, because somehow the snake is a separate live entity, it has to, even though what would happen would be a direct result, since it took a step and stage, right, that becomes a grumma type of a case. Okay, anyway, but we're going to move on. So the case of when it doesn't have kavana lahazik, it makes an enormous amount of sense to say that you don't stone it, that you're not going to stone it, and the Gemara isn't even sort of talking about that, but the question remains, will you still pay kofar? And I would think that that would be the general sort of logic, that there could be cases where it's not wicked enough to be stoned, but you might still pay kofar. But again, like that would be a question, and we didn't address it by the stadium ox. Maybe it's not stoned. Will you pay kofar? We don't know. That wasn't addressed. Let's look now at the Mishnah. The Mishnah is now going to talk about the difference between the basic point about muah, that you need to be a muah to be paying kofar. It says it in the psukim, right? Okay, then in kofar you shot alav, etc. So the Torah, so it's clear that you only pay kofar after it's been warned and so on. So let's look at this Mishnah. For sure, shenagach es adam, right? Who made? So caught a person and the person died. Muad mishalim kofar, v'tam patamina kofar. Muad pays kofar and the time is exempt. But either one, as the Torah says, by the first time it does it, the Torah says hashor yisakel, right? To call yisakel hashor, v'lo yachal b'saro, ubal hashor naki. Okay. It also is the same if it kills a child. Now, of course, the point is it's obvious, yes, but what
Yeah,
the
but that's the next
what,
pasuk.
yeah, I know, but what the thank you. So, but what the Mishnah is doing is it's working its way through the psukim, right? The psukim basically have that. They say, "O ben yigach o bat yigach mishpat hazeh yeyaseh lo." Does anybody know what the next pasuk is?
Im Eved Yigach
Im
Ashur.
Eved yigach ashur, right? Or im ben yigach o bat yigach, okay? And then it says, "Im Eved yigach ashur," which is the next line of the Mishnah.
So Keser Shloshim.
Right. So the Mishnah is working its way through the psukim. Okay. So Naloch Eved Oama Nosin Shloshim Slaim, you pay 30 shekel. Bein Shu Yafa Mea Mana, Bein Shu Enu Yafa Ela Dinar Echad. Whether it's worth 100 mana, which is a huge amount, or whether it's only worth 1 dinar, it's always the slave. How much would the slave go in the slave market? You always pay 30 shekels. So as opposed to kofar, which, as we've seen before, is a debate about how much either the owner of the ox or the killed person would go in the slave market, what their value would be, but it's based on the slave market and it's based on the particular person. Ironically, by the slave itself, it's not based on the slave market, and it's not based by his going price. It's based by a fixed amount of 30 shekel. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says. If once you're going to kill the ox as a tam, if you actually did what the Torah said, you stoned the ox the first time, how does it ever live long enough to be a muad?
No, maybe
okay.
they gored oxen 3 times.
All right, let's take a look. Good, let's take a look. Amar Rabba, that basically you saw the way Rashi describes it is it was running after people and it almost would have killed them, except they made a last minute escape. But you see that it has in it the desire, the violence, and the habitual, and the nature to go and to try to kill people. Of course, the funny thing is maybe it's not smart enough to actually succeed in doing it. So that doesn't actually mean that it's going to be able to kill people, okay? And maybe it just wanted to gore them without killing them. How do you know it would have actually, gone through and totally killed them? Anyway, the Gemara says, Ravashi Amar Umdin Alav Klumu. That doesn't count for anything. Like just because you had assess would have had it gored them. Ella, what are we talking about? You go and it critically injured 3 people, okay, and because they critically injured, you couldn't kill it yet, right? Because the person hadn't died, so you can't actually execute the shore before the person is dead. But you can actually warn the owner and say your ox goes out and fatally wounds people. You have to watch it. So that's good enough to warn the owner and to identify that it has that ability to actually it acts on fatally wounding people. So that's enough to make it a shur hamuad. And then if it actually, Rashi would say that people would actually have to die before you paid kofar. But so it would be good enough to make it into a shur hamuad and for you to be warned. But presumably until they actually died, it would not fully have that status to be a shor hamuad for you to pay kofar. Although I don't know if that's clear in the Gemara. Right? Rashi says, Rashi says, "Lefikach lo nisko b'shem harishon u'kshenach shlishi mesu kula hilchach mishalim alav as hakofar." So I'm not exactly sure why you have to say mesu kula. Why don't you just say the last guy died? Okay, but if that was good enough to make it into a muad, why did they all have to die before you paid the last kofar? Anyway, the other interesting thing I should mention, by the way, and I've been sort of hiding this from you, is because Rashi consistently assumes that the full payment of a muad or the payment of a kofar comes at the third goring. Okay, that is not pshat of all the sugyas, as Tosfos makes it clear. Pshat of all the sugyas is it did it 3 times. The first 3 times it was a tam, so that by the 4th time it'll be a muad. Right, and that's like the simple sense of the Gemara. Because it gored 3 people and fatally injured them, now it is a muad for the 4th person it will gore. Right, that's the simple read of all these Gemaras. Rashi always reads it that it's a muad, that the 3rd one it's paying full, the 3rd one it's paying kofar. Anyway, that's the case of that's whose answer was that? Rav Ashi's answer. Rav Zvid says Kigon Shaharak Shlosha Behemot. Like Michael said, it's killed 3 behemot. So the Gemara says 1 minute. Using just because something is habitual to kill a behemah, that makes it a muad for killing people. Now, you might remember that there was a debate before of Rav Zvid and who was it, Rav Ashi, whether vimuat's, ve'emuat's not or ve'enamuat's not. and Rav Zvid's reading was Veinamud, meaning Rav Zvid read it, that yes, we assume that, at least based on the things that it's goring, that we do not limit it to what we concretely saw. We assume once it became a muad in a standard case, unless it's been obvious that it's not goring certain types of people or animals, but without that evidence, we assume that it's going to be a muad to gore everything. And even if it gores animal, it will be a muad to gore adam. That was Rav Zvid. Rav Zvid is completely consistent. But the Gemara here, is just the stam of the Gemara thinks that's absurd. Of course, you don't go from one to the other, which is again proof for the Rif's position that we rule I think it was Rav Papa, who was it before? Anyway, we will einamu atznan. That is the presumption of all these Gemaras, that you do not generally abstract it. You interpret the ha'ada, you interpret it becoming a muad in the narrowest way possible that fits the evidence of what it has done. Okay, so that's what the Gemara rejects Rav Zvid. You can't go from behema to adam. No, if it kills behema, it's only a muad for behema. Ella Amar of Shimi, so Shimi says, now, actually, the original Gersa was Goyim, but as I said, we edit out, we censor all those things out. Okay, it killed non-Jews. So, because the reason it's censored out is because the obvious point is you don't stone an ox for goring non-Jews. You only stone an ox for goring Jews. But clearly, though, it has a propensity for killing people, so it becomes a muad.
So therefore, if it kills a Jew on the fourth time.
If it kills a Jew on the fourth time, you would stone it and pay kofar. So the Gemara says, "Muad lov they call muad l'goyim have a muad Yisrael."
Why not?
What? You just think because of one, it'll be a muad for the other. Now again, this begins to indicate. Remember, the Gemara in the end had this case about it doing on alternating days and doing
Shabbatot, you
15th of Ito. Well, Shabbat also there was a reason.
Maybe
and we raised the question after when we did that earlier Gemara. When you limit it to the circumstances of the goring, does there have to be a logic behind it? Or is it just a formal process, and if this is the only thing it did, then in a formal way, that's the only identity you can have as a muad. So the most obvious case that we were being, by the end of that sugya a week ago or so, completely formalist, was the idea that if it gored on the 15th of each month, or the 15th, the 16th, and the 17th, that it established that type of a pattern. I mean, I don't know, maybe you could say it's being affected by the moon or something. Okay, but it seemed like the Gemara was being highly formalistic, and that could be the same point here. Who needs to give a reason? If it only killed non-Jews, then that would only be a muad for killing non-Jews. I don't know. Let's say it only killed people. So far, right now, it's only killed people between 20 and 24. Would you say that? I'm serious. How narrow do you do just because of the circumstances of what it actually did these three times? It could be, however, the Gemara assumes that there is a reason. The Gemara often says an idea like that is, the sense maybe that Jews have special protection. Like a little bit more like special divine protection. So maybe just because it was able to kill non-Jews, I don't know if history bears out the fact that we have been more protected from onslaught and injury or whatever. But anyway, what? Maybe from oxen we have, right. It's only from oppression from non-Jews that we have it. From oxen we
No, I was thinking maybe because differences in dress, like Shabbat.
Oh, okay. Maybe they dress in a different way. That's a good point. Although there's a lot of evidence that in the time of the Gemara there was no difference in dress. So anyway, okay, not even a kippah. All right, so the Gemara says like this. Wow, that wouldn't make it a muad for killing Jews. It's killed three people that were a treifa. And here you see that when we only stone the ox, we do treat it as how would we treat a case of if a human being murdered. So for a human being who commits murder, if the victim is a treifa, has an internal injury that he'll die within a year, then that is not considered to be an act that you execute somebody for. Now, I want to point out it's not just about life expectancy. If somebody is out, we actually cost him like chaysha, even if somebody is basically on dying of cancer and has just minutes left to live, and somebody were to kill him, that would actually be murder, and you would execute the person. Okay, well, because but it's specifically the status of a trait, or maybe cancer isn't a good issue because maybe that would sort of be, I don't know exactly what that does to the inside, but somebody is dying of old age, let's say. Whereas treifa, something based on a specific phenomenon of an internal injury, that halachically gives a person a different status. But the point is that it's not just a question, it's not a goses, it's not just a question of life expectancy. Okay, so we say that normally by the case of murder, that a person would not be executed if they kill a treifa. So that's how the Gemara has this answer. So you won't execute the shore either, but it'll be a muad because clearly it kills people. So the Gemara says, Kigon Shahara Shlosha B'nei Adam Treifa. So the Gemara rejects that too. What? What? Just because it's a muad for a treifa, is it a muad for a shalim? Now again, the Gemara might think, maybe a treifa
Can't defend
is
himself, can't run away
can't
or
defend himself as well. Maybe sends off messages to the animals that pick up on that scent that this person's about to die. The same way like the ravens start to circle or whatever. So who knows what it is? Maybe he attracts scoring animals the way a shalim would not. Okay, so anyway, all right. So the Gemara says, Ella Amar Papa, the Kotov Arak La'agma, the Kotov Arak La'agma. Let's not try to get a case about that we're going to transfer from one type of a goring to another, because you seem to be highly formalistic here and not allow us to be abstracting it all. So fine, he did do 3 gorings and he should have been stoned by the first one. But every time, Beis Din wasn't able to capture him. I mean, he was a pretty wild ox. So he ran away. Remember, we had the swamp the other day where you're hiding your ox. He ran away to the swamp. Beis Din isn't able to capture him, but they warn the owner. They say, you better watch that ox. We're going to try to kill it if we get into our hands, but you better watch it. And, and so on. And then he went and he gored again. And that happened 3 times. Beis Din was not able to capture it in order to stone it. And therefore, but the owner was warned. Now, the irony is, or the interesting thing is, when it says Arak, it ran away, is that, following this idea that you treat the ox like a person who committed murder, is that you basically, have to have the accepting. You have to have the court case in the presence of the ox. The ox got to be an idea. So the ox actually had to have been captured, right? Although not necessarily. No. Maybe the point is that you didn't have the court case to begin with, right? Meaning you saw that you accepted. Well, no, because you have to accept the testimony that it killed. That would be an interesting question. If the ox has run away and we can't hold the court case to stone it because the ox isn't present, so we can't take the testimony of the witnesses that it's killed for the purpose of basically executing the ox, can you still accept the testimony of the witnesses for the purpose of warning the owner? So that might be. Okay, so that might be. So because
I assume the ox does not testify in its own behalf.
Exactly. Okay. So anyway, all right. So the ox isn't around, and it's possible to read this that you can even accept the witnesses even not in the presence of the ox, but the ox isn't around, so you're not able to stone the ox. Okay. Rav Acha Breder Rav Ika Amar Kigo Shehuzmu Zomime Zomime. Okay. So the people who were mizamein the Eidim and turned them into Zomim, they themselves became Eidim Zomim. What does that mean? It means 2 witnesses came, pair 1 of witnesses came and said, your ox gored somebody, and we're going to put it to, and they accepted the testimony in court, and they were going to put it to death, and then before they did that, a group of witnesses number 2 said, you don't know that. You were with us on that day. You're lying. Okay, you're lying. Throw out the whole court case. Okay. Then that happened a second time. The witnesses came again and said, your ox scored. We have to stone your ox. And group number 2 said, you can't say that. You were with us. Okay, throw it out. Happened a third time. Okay, then what happened was that the group number 2 that had been consistently undermining the testimony of group number 1.
The same group or 2?
Then a group number 3 came and said, how could you be undermining the testimony of group number 1? You were with us on all those days. So what happens at that stage? You throw out group number 2 and you resuscitate group number 1's testimony. Now becomes valid. Okay. And now it turns out that the owner was warned all 3 times, right? Because each time the testimony of group number 1 had been accepted, and it turns out that the ox genuinely had gored. Okay, now of course the owner could say, well, how did I know? I didn't know if it gored or not. I trusted the group number 2. I didn't take the warning of group number 1 seriously because it turned out that because I was believing group number 2 that group number 1 was lying. So let's see what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says that if the whole purpose is to prove that the ox has been warned, the ox has been testified against, and the ox is habitual shapir, then you know by the end that all 3 testimonies originally were correct and actually had done it 3 times. But if the person needs to be warned and take the warning seriously and then violate it 3 times, so Meimer Amarle, he could say, I didn't know that my ox was goring. I trusted, group number 2 that invalidated the testimony. So the Gemara says no. Could go into Amri, no, because what group number 1 said was, every time your ox scored, you were there. So group number 1 was constantly testifying and saying, your ox scored and you were there. So when it turns out retroactively that group number one was telling the truth, he cast, you knew they were telling the truth. It was very nice that there was other witnesses that were saying they were lying. But you were warned, and even after group number two, the Zomamim came, you knew that the group number two was lying. So that warning still should have counted as a good warning for you. And they are testifying that you were present, so clearly you should have taken that seriously.
Right, Rabbi Linzer,
Yes.
what's the difference between the two eduyot? One is that we were made that the ox was we
Group
didn't
number one says that they are testifying that your ox gored, okay? Your ox gored, okay? That's what they're testifying. And they're saying that you, the owner, was there and you saw it gore, okay? That's what they're testifying. There's the dead guy. Okay, they're testifying to that. So they testify you were there. They're warning you. You better watch your ox. Okay, comes along group number two and says, no, you're lying. Okay, they say you're lying. Okay, so, and then that happens 3 times.
Right.
Okay, so he can say, but then it turns out that group number 3 says you're lying, and then that makes this okay. Okay, so basically what we're saying is every single time group number 1 warned you, you knew they were telling the truth. Okay, they said you were there. Now we believe them in their original testimony that you were there. So now we believe that every time they testified, you knew they were telling the truth and you were properly warned. And you can't say, well, once they were proven liars and based, I didn't have to pay attention to them. You knew group number 2 was lying all along. Right. That warning was still good for you.
I was just asking on the Ilia Ode Torah Ilia Ode Gavra. In other words, just what's the
because even if you weren't around, right? Even if they weren't testifying that you were around, if the whole point of the witnesses is to just prove that the ox is habitual, then he can't say, well, I didn't know. Who cares if you knew they were telling that? Now you know that your ox has killed 3 times, okay?
They were witness to the act.
Which, by the way, if you're saying to you, Torah, that's the easiest answer. The easiest answer is that one group of witnesses comes to Basin and says, your ox is gored 3 times. Right. Okay, you would still need to say, how did it get away after that to gore a 4th time? But anyway, but that's the point. You would not need the person to be warned each time and then it gores. You just need to know at the end of the day it gored 3 times. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Ravina Amar b'mikyunet abal hashor ve'ein mikyunet hashor. So they say, look, we know one of your oxen gored and killed somebody. We don't know which ox. Okay, so we can't stone it. But then what happens is that then by the 3rd time, they say actually, oh, now we recognize, or the 4th time, now we know that it's been this ox all along, okay? So by the end, they recognize it, but each time you received warning, but they couldn't stone the ox because they didn't recognize which ox it was until the last time when they recognized that was the ox that had been doing it all along, okay? So the Gemara says, 1 minute, but if you didn't know which ox it was and you couldn't gore it, then I didn't know which ox it was to stop it from goring. So what was I supposed to do? So the Gemara says, no. No, because they could say, look, you do have a goring ox amongst your cattle. So your responsibility now is to watch all of your cattle. That's enough to obligate you that one ox is a murderous ox, to obligate you to watch all of them. You can't say, I have no responsibility because I don't know which one. Okay, so that would be a case where we can't stone the ox, but by the end, we realize it's been the same ox all along, and we identify it so we can stone the ox and make you pay kofar. All right, so a lot of very interesting scenarios that the Gemara draws. Let's take a look. Okay, okay, so the kofar is only by the 3rd or 4th time, but already it's chayav misa from the 1st time. So once it says that you shall stone the ox, right? This is by the 1st time. Any addition of then it's obviously an avela. It's an animal that has been properly slaughtered. You can't eat it. So why does it say stone it and don't eat the meat? Of course you don't eat the meat. It's an avela. Just say stone it. So the Gemara says, once it's in a status that it deserves to be stoned. Did I skip a line? No. Once it's in a status that it deserves to be stoned, okay, it's a kol yisakel, that's its status, then already lo yachel pesaro, then it becomes forbidden to be eaten. So even if you succeeded in shechting it and not carrying out the judgment, once the judgment has been passed, It has a status of a shor niskal, and the meat is forbidden even if you shecht it. Okay? La'achar shenimudino asur b'achila. Ein li ala b'achila. So that's one thing you learn out from lo yecha b'saram. Ein li ala b'achila. Now I only know you can't eat the meat. But no, I mean, how do I know you can't get any benefit from it? Talmud Omar, ubal ashur naki. The owner of the ox is clean. Now, the simple sense of that pasuk is, it's in contrast to v'gam be'alav yuma, right? The pasuk says what it says. Ono da kishor nagachu. Kishor nagachu. Okay? So this is a case of muad. Okay? So muad, you deserve death. Gam be'alav muad means you deserve death. In kofar, you shall alav, but you can buy back your life by paying some type of a monetary atonement payment. The simple sense of the pasuk, by the way, is that if you don't have the money to pay kofar, we will kill you. Okay, that's probably shot. That's shot of the pasuk. But even if you say it means you deserve death, but you have but instead of death, you're going to get kofar. But the first time it says ki gach shor ish, right? What is it? No, not shor. What is it? Anyway, what? Kigach, what is it? Somebody just tell me. Oh, Kigach shor et ish. Okay, et ish, o et isha v'meit, et ish, o et isha. Okay, el et isha v'meit, sakol yisakel. Yeah. Right, hashor. Lo yachel. Right, ubal hashor naki. So this ubal hashor naki is. Here it's Hashor Yisakel, which echoes Sakol Yisakel, but here it's Baal Hashor Naki, and it's Gam Be'alav Yumat. So obviously the pshat of the pasuk is, hey, it did it the first one or two times or whatever. You can't be blamed for that. You don't have any real, guilt. You don't certainly not deserving of death. We just got to kill your ox. Okay, so that's pshat. But the Gemara is going to read Baal Hashor Naki in a very different way. Let's take a look. Okay, where were we? Okay. I only know you can't eat it. But how do you know you can't get it? You're clean. My mashma, where do you get that from that pasuk? Shimon ben Zuma Omer Adam Shomel Chaveiro Yatzish Ploni's Nakim Chasad. This person was cleaned out of his property. The Ein Lo Bo Hanasha Klum, and he has no benefit left of him. He's left completely with nothing. He's been cleaned out. See, so those idioms don't go away. All right. Anyway, so Baal Shor Naki means you get cleaned out from your ownership of the ox. You can't get any benefit. So that's what we know. You don't get benefit, and the status begins once it's been judged as a shor niskal even before it's been stoned. How do you know lo yachas b'saro is telling you that it's referring to a case when it was shechted after the judgment has been passed? That you can't derive any benefit or eat it out already at that stage. Why don't I say maybe if you succeeded in shechting it, maybe it would be permissible, okay? Because you did not execute it, and it only gets its status when it's actually executed. The high lo yachas b'saro. So why do we need lo yachas b'saro? If it's already stoned and executed, it's an avela. That would be a case it was executed, it was stoned. The Asr B'Hana, and maybe what Lo Ye'achel B'Saro, maybe Baal Hashor Naki is not telling you that you can't get Hana. That will tell you something else. We'll see what in a minute. And maybe Lo Ye'achel B'Saro, the point of that, the whole status would only be after it's stoned. So why does it have to say don't eat? You already can't eat it. It's an avela. Lo Ye'achel tells you don't get Hana. Kill Rabbi Avo, like Rabbi Avo. I'm a Rabbi Avo, I'm a Rabbi Linzer. Kol Makom Shenemer Lo Ye'achel, Lo Yochal, Lo Tochal, Lo Sochlu. Whenever it says don't eat includes don't get benefit. Unless it explicitly tells you you're allowed to get benefit. Like it tells you by an avela. What does it say by an avela? It says, don't eat an avela, give it to the sojourner or sell it to the foreigner. Which means that, why did you have to tell me give it to the sojourner or sell it to the foreigner? Just tell me don't eat it. I can figure out that I can go ahead, I'm not going to throw it out, I'll make some money off of it, I'll give it away, I'll sell it or whatever. Okay, it's the fact that you had to tell me that I can give it or sell it shows me by default, I should assume when it says don't eat, it means don't get benefit. Okay, that's the position of Rabbi Avo. Since I had to tell you there, you can get benefit, you can learn from this that whenever it says don't eat, it means don't get benefit, unless it explicitly tells you it's permissible. Okay, leger benasina, to give it to the stranger as a gift, or to the foreigner as a sale. Anyway, so maybe lo yechel p'saro just means don't get hana, and we're not. But still, we're talking that you stoned it. No, no. You could say if lo yachel is coming to tell you don't eat, then it includes don't get benefit. So the Torah will say lo yachel to mean don't eat and don't get benefit. But here, if I already know that you can't eat it because it's been stoned and it's an avela, so the only point of the Torah now saying something new is just to tell me don't get hana. If that's true, hi lo yachel as b'saro is saranahu. So the only point of lo yachel is not to tell me both achila and hana. Here it's just to tell me hana. So if that's true, nichtav rachmana lo yehana. So then just say what you mean to say. Say don't get benefit, okay? If it has to tell me don't eat and it wants to incorporate don't get benefit, fine. But here I already know you can't eat it. So if the only point now is to say don't get benefit, just say that. Say what you're trying to say. Inami, lo yachel, or look, maybe it will say lo yachel and that'll just cover both. But even if that's true, et bisaro lamali, why does it have to say the flesh, the meat? Just tell me, don't get benefit. Let's say lo yachel means eating or benefit. What is et bisaro coming to tell?
The other point is it's a passive verb. Liyachel.
Well, that's also true, but we're not getting into that. But that is relevant in the general issue of whether it means hana. Right. But the point here is, why does it say et bisaro? The av agav. So this is where I know that it's telling me even if you shechted it, because et bisaro is telling me the following: the av agav, the avde kein basar. You made it like meat, meaning you did not, you actually basar. Actually, they have a word like it's like beef, right? I remember this whole thing about about when certain animals the words they use for them in a culinary context. So beef doesn't mean clearly means meat that you're going to be eating, right? So that's what the Gemara is sort of saying here. That lo yachos b'saro means even though you made it into beef, you shechted it, it's still asur. It's still a shor haniska. Okay, to shachte asur. Okay, so even though you shechted it and made it like basar. So the Gemara is saying lo yechel b'saro is coming to tell me. This tells me it's an avela if you actually stoned it. Lo yechel b'saro is telling me even if you shechted it, once it had the judgment passed, even if you made it into beef and you shechted it, it still can't be eaten. And then this tells me not only cannot be eaten, you also can't even derive benefits from it. Okay? Masif lo marzuta. So Zuta asked, Ema honey mealy, let me say that's true that you cannot, when you made it like beef, you can't get benefit even if you didn't stone it. If you shechted it with a nice sharp flint, you checked the flint, make sure it had no nits, it was a kosher shechita knife, and you used a rock to do a shechita. So you did a shechita that was like stoning it with a stone. We like stoning it, okay? So maybe that would be the best way to have it. It was a sakol yisakel, and it was a type of a basar, because the shechting with a rock was a type of a skila. Maybe that's the case where you can't get where it applies even if it wasn't stoned. The avde ke'ein skila, you made it like stone. Let's say you shechted it with a knife. Maybe that would be like a completely different category. Low. And then you would say that case, actually, it's not usher. If you actually shechted it and it wasn't even something that was similar to skila, maybe that actually would be totally permissible. So Gemara says, no. Amri. Atu, saking ksiva be'oraisa? What? You think the Torah, when it says shechting, talks about a knife? That's not. Hashochi p'magad yad, b'tzur b'kaneh. If you shecht with like a hand sif, or a rock, or a reed, it's kosher as long as it's like a smooth, nut-nicked blade. So what does that mean? It means the Torah doesn't recognize in the act of shechita any difference between shechting with a knife or shechting with a rock. Those have no different status in the world of shechita. And since they don't have any different status, because the Torah doesn't even identify the type of the knife, so if this pasuk means that some type of a shechita, it remains forbidden, that would be true by all types of shechita. There's no way you can distinguish between the types of shechita. Okay? So lo yechal et b'saro tells me even if you made it like beef, this applies once it's judged, even if it has not been stoned. And this tells me, Balashur Naki, that you can't get hana. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. The Hashad in Afgale, Isra Achila, Isra Anami, Lo Yeachel B'Saro. But 1 minute, Gemara says. But we just got through saying that once Lo Yeachel is coming to tell me Isra Achila, it will also tell me Isra Hana. Remember, we just introduced that. So Et B'Saro tells me that you shechted it. This tells me you shechted it. Shchita, Et B'Saro. Okay? So even if you shechted it. So now this tells me Achila plus Hana, right? Because now we've established that Lo Yachel includes an Isser Hana. So if you stone it, either you stone it and make it in a vela, then you know it's Asher B'Achiva, or even if you made it like Basar and you shechted it, Lo Yachel, you can't eat it or get Hana. So I don't need Balashur Naki to tell me don't get Hana anymore. So what am I going to do with that part of the process? To tell me you can't even get benefit even from the skin. Once you said besaro, that sounds like the problem is only in the meat of the animal. Let me actually, and that's actually worth a lot of money, right? You can use it as leather and so on. Maybe it's limited to besaro. So that's why it says naki, you've been cleaned out. The same idea. You don't get any benefit from it. Not only no benefit from the meat, you don't even get any benefit from the skin. Okay. Now the Gemara says like this. Come on. The other Tanaim that say Balashur Naki teaches you some other halacha, parenthetically, as we're going to say later on. Always interesting when the Gemara is self-referential like that, whether that was originally in the Gemara or that was glossed in later. Anyway, so the Gemara says we're going to say that Balashur Naki might mean something else. Hanas Araminalahu. Where do you learn out that you can't get benefit from the skin? So you told me here after you stoned it, even if you shechted it, don't eat and don't get benefit. So the only thing this is left to tell me is not only from the meat, even from the skin. But if you use this to tell me something else, where do I learn that you can't get benefit from the leather, from the skin? So the Gemara says, Nafkalahum, the et besaro, the extra word of et. Et atafel besaro. Not only the meat itself, even the et besaro, even the thing that is secondary and connected, appended to the meat, even the skin. Mind you, what is it that's appended to the meat? Oh, the skin, the leather. The high Tana, that's why. So the other one who learns from Balashur Naki to speak about the skin, why didn't he learn it from the word et? So the high Tana, et lo darish, he doesn't darshan et. He doesn't think you can learn anything from the words et. And this always gives us a fun opportunity to bring in Kidatanya, Shimon Hamsuni, Va'amile, Nechemi Hamsuni, Hayadorish called Es in Shevet Torah. He would interpret all of the times it said Es in the Torah to come to say that's including something that is like appended to, associated with the thing itself. Even Shigia Es Hashem Elokechatira, but then he got to the pasuk, you should fear Hashem your God. Es Pirish. He separated. He said, "What can be comparable? What's seen as comparable to fear of God? What thing on this planet can you feel like God? Could be like appended to God." So Amrlo Talmidav. So the student said to him, "Rabbi, called Esin Shedaraj Kamatei Alein. What about all those wonderful drashot? Everything you learned out from the time it said S in the past." The same way I was rewarded by learning out things from those words. I will get. You're going to get schar for your prisha right now, Rabbi. I will get schar for separating, for holding back, which is an amazing statement, by the way, of like intellectual honesty. Like I'm going to give up like 20 years of my life's work because I realized it was all based on a false premise. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Akiva came and taught Et Hashem Elokechatira l'Rabbos Talmidei Chachamim, to come to include Torah sages. They are considered to be like God. Now, the question is like what? And Shimon Hamsuni could not realize that. So the beautiful sort of teaching I always heard was until you could see a Talmid Chacham that would be willing to give up 20 years of their life's work for their intellectual honesty, you didn't think that no Talmid Chacham could be compared to like this idea of Yiras Hashem. But now you sort of can really appreciate what that type of dedication to truth of Torah could be like, and that could evoke a sense of Yira that could be compared to God. Now, by the way, Tosfos makes an interesting point. If you look at Tosfos, he says, Tosfos said, Avgav the Perikamit Kiddush, Darish, Nemer Ishmo V'Aviv Tiro, Nemer Es Hashem Elokechatira, Hishva Kosiv Moras Aveim Moras Shemayim. So the Gemara says, the Gemara does it in other places. fear of parents is analogous to fear of God. It says Es Hashem lokechatira ishmo vaviv tiro. The Psukim phrase it in similar ways. God gives you life, your parents give you life, and so on. So you see, we make those types of comparisons. So it says no. So Tosfos says yes, but that's just sort of saying this mitzvah is analogous to that mitzvah. It would not actually, Tosfos, the way I'll read Tosfos is, it's different to say something is made, and this mitzvah is analogous. It's not to say that in the mitzvah of loving God, there's something that's associated with God that you're also supposed to love. That's part of the mitzvah of loving God. Like that's actually making it too much in the same category. Right? It's very different to say there's a mitzvah of God, a mitzvah of your parents, and there's some analogy between those two mitzvahs than to say the mitzvah of God includes the following people who are like God. Right? That's like way too close, possibly heretical, and that's what you're not prepared to say. Okay, so anyways, but then Rabbi Akiva says, no, you know what? Some Talmidei Chachamim could be in that category. Okay, yes, Dov.
How are we supposed to imagine that or reconcile this with the idea of Masorah and that all these drushes are passed down from one's teachers?
We don't assume that all the drushes are passed down from one's teachers. The only thing we assume that about primarily is Gzera Shava. And even by Gzera Shava, right? I mean, according to the Rambam assumes that the whole reason that you have debates in the Gemara, right? The whole Kara'itic critique of rabbinic Judaism was you can't say you have authentic traditions. Every single page you're arguing about it. So obviously the transmission was broken and you can't trust anything. And Rambam's basic response to that was that very little, like this whole approach about like the Halacha Moshe Sinai, was actually the content of it was passed down. His claim was that there was never debate about it. All the rest is just us using our human intellect to derive the halachot, using the hermeneutic principles. And therefore, that's why there are debates. So really, like, nothing was passed down. It was all derived. Now, the problem is that we say that Gzera Shava had to have been passed down. But as the Ramban already points out, a number of Gemara say, well, why do you make Gzera Shava from this pasuk, make it from that pasuk? Remember, what's the question? Gzera Shava is total Masorah. So Ramban says, even a Gzera Shava is in total Masorah. So Masorah is, you can learn this halacha from a Gzera Shava. But then you have, like, a lot of latitude about, like, figuring out what the Gzera Shava is. So the bottom line is very little, at least according to, I think certainly from a modern perspective, and according to the Rambam and whatever, and other Rishonim, very little is actual that the content was handed down. It's the ability to darshan, which is the empowering of the Supreme Court. You empower the rabbis to darshan, and then that becomes the doraita, right? So, okay. So the Gemara says like this: Tanu Rabbanan, Baal Ashur Naki, Rabbi Akiva Omer Naki Michatzi Kofer. Now we're going to say the other things that you can learn out from Baal Ashur Naki. Rabbi Eliezer says you don't have to pay Chatzi Kofer. If it was a tam, so maybe we should make an analogy. You pay Kofer by a muad, full Kofer. Maybe a tam should pay half Kofer. Of course, again, Pshat of the Psuki in Baal Ashur Naki is exactly to tell you don't have liability. But maybe actually that's a drasha that fits. You're naki, and you're totally naki in the first 3 times because you're not paying half kofer. But anyway, okay, Baal Ashur Naki, Rabbi Eliezer were naki michatzi kofer. Don't make that analogy. You don't pay half kofer. Amar Rabbi Akiva, v'lo atzmo ein mishtalim el migufo. Rabbi Akiva says, well, who needs that drasha? Half payment. If you were to make an analogy of a tam and half payment of a tam is done from the animal itself. So how could I pay half kofer? Have you let the owner say, oh, you want to get your half kofer payment from my ox? Be my guest. After we stone it, we'll bring it to Beis Din and you can get paid from it. And we've just found out that you can't get any benefit from it at all. So who needs to say you don't pay half kofer? Because you would make an analogy to a short tam. If you make that analogy, you get paid from the body of the ox, but the body of the ox isn't worth anything because you're stoning it. Right? Is that clear? So Rabbi Akiva says, who needs that drasha? Even if the halacha would be you should pay half kofer, there'd be nothing to pay because the body would be worthless. People with me? I'm getting these blank looks. You understand the point? Okay, fine. All right. So the Gemara says, okay, you shall. So Amalod, Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer said back to him, Kachani beinecha? That's what you think of me? That you think I would say such a stupid thing? I gotta love it. That you think I would be talking about a case like that where they actually stoned the ox? Of course, if they stoned the ox, there's no way to get payment. So Eshechayev Misa? No. The din I was dealing with was El Kashahini Etadama Pierechad or Pibalit, that we're not going to stone the ox, that you need 2 witnesses to stone the ox. So here the owner admitted, or one witness admitted, said that it had been. that would not be enough to stone the ox. That's like a murder trial. You need 2. But maybe it's certainly your own admission. Maybe that would be enough that you should be paying kofar and have kofar. Okay? So the Gemara says 1 minute. Apibalim, motivi knasu. 1 minute. If the owners are admitting, you wouldn't pay based on that. You're admitting to a knas. No. Kasavar kufra kapara. No, kofar is a kapara. So it's like admitting that you're chayav a korban. If you admit you're chayav a korban, you admit you're chayav kapara, you admit you're chayav. So there's no 2 witnesses. We're not going to stone the ox. You admit. And we would make you pay based on your own admission because it's a kapara. It's not a knas. Okay, Tanya Ida. We're talking another break. Amalo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said back to him after Rabbi Akiva said, "How are you supposed to be paying kofar from a stoned ox?" Akiva, kachani beinecha shedini b'zeh. That's what you think of me? That you would think I'd be dealing with the case that they stoned the ox? Shechayev misa, that I'm dealing with the case that the ox was worthy of being stoned? Ein dini ela b'miskavin laugas behema vargas adam. I'm talking about a case where the ox isn't going to be a stone, but you might still pay a kofar. What would be that? Remember, I asked you earlier this morning to think about when you might have not stoning the ox but still paying kofar, right? About the stadium ox. Could it be you don't stone it? It's not wicked enough. It's not a murder enough to be stoned, but you would pay a kofar. So he says, let's say the ox tried to kill an animal and accidentally killed a person. Okay, almost would be like maybe a regel case or a shame case too. Going back to that. So it's not trying to kill a person. It's not murder. So you're not going to stone it, but a person died as a result. So you would pay kofar, all right? Or lemitzri, again, really meaning lagoy, v'harag Yisrael. Okay, well, you won't stone it, but because it did not do, this act that's worthy of stoning, but human life was lost. The neftalim, or tried to kill a fetus, which is not, again, it would not be an act of murder if a person did that. V'harag ben kayama, and killed a viable person. So therefore, it would be a case where it intentionally where it did not do an act of trying to take a human life or whatever, to take a life that would be chayav misa, but nevertheless, the life was lost, so it won't get skila, but it will be kofar. And again, this would be good evidence, by the way, that in the case of like regel, like it would be parallel to this, right? If you say that there's kofar by regel, no skila because it wasn't trying to take a life, it wasn't this kavanas al-hazik and so on, but nevertheless, the life was lost. So there could be kofar. Here, though, it's even worse. It is a kavana lahazik, just not a kavana lahazik to kill a human being or to kill a person that you'd be chayav misa for. So let's just do one more line in the Gemara. Hi Amar Lahu Bereisha. Which one of these 2 answers did he say first? Rav Kahana Mishnei Derava Amar Miskavin Amar Lahu Bereisha. First, he gave the answer of trying to kill an animal and killing a human. Rav Tavyumi Mishnei Derava Amar Hamis Amar Lahu Bereisha. No, first he gave the answer about trying to kill through that it was the person's own testimony. And that's why we know that it killed, but we don't have witnesses that it killed. So Rav Kahana Mishmei Rav Miskavin Amar Lebereisha, Mashal Litzayad Sheshola Dagi Min Hayam, like somebody who is capturing fish and taking them out of the sea. Mishkach Rav Ravi. So first he gets some nice big fish. Shakil, he takes it. That's great. I got a big hack. Zupi, then afterwards he gets small little fish afterwards. A shakil. I'm not going to throw them back. I might as well keep those too. So first you have the good answer. We're assuming the better answer is Niskavin Laugas of the Hema Vargas Adam. Because that's a type of a case where the animal was fundamentally not chayav misa. It's not just it lacked the right type of testimony and witnesses. Fundamentally, it's not chayav misa. So that's the big fish. That's the better answer. So first he gave a good answer. And then he said, "Oh, you know what? I thought of another supporting answer. It's not as good as my real answer. Here's my real answer. But here's another case too. You'll keep the small fish." No, first he said the weaker answer. You're catching fish. You find a small fish, you keep it. You don't know if you're going to get a big fish. Then you get the big fish. So shadi zukri, you throw out the small fish. Who needs the small fish anymore? For shakal ravri, you keep the big one. So first he gave a weaker answer. Then he realized he had a better answer. So forget the first answer I gave. I'll give you a better answer. Okay. So it's an interesting. What?
That makes more sense.
That obviously does make more sense. Okay, we will continue with this tomorrow. Really?